Good afternoon to you. It is 4:06 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, Itamar Marcus will join us. He's the founder of the Palestinian Media Watch. We'll talk about his organization's findings that the Palestinian Authority has been paying off the families of terrorists who killed Jews this past week. It's a horrifying story. Itamar's got the details. Pat Fallon, the congressman, is with us at 5 o'clock. That's the plan, anyway. The U.S. House in the midst of some apparently contentious votes about who becomes the next speaker. Jim Jordan trying to wrap it up. We'll see if that happens. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. I started the program by telling you that CNN was just lying in a headline about what it knew today in Gaza. They claimed Israel hits hospital in Gaza. They have now changed their headline to Israel accused of blasting hospital. Things are changing in real time. It is a very Orwellian moment we're all living through. The IDF, I was just sharing with you moments ago, that the IDF has released a statement that this was Hamas's fault. Hamas had unleashed a barrage of rockets meant to hit Israel in the vicinity of the hospital. They fired them off near the hospital. This is Hamas's tactics. And they say that they believe that Hamas is responsible for the failed rocket fire that hit the hospital, killing hundreds. So, again, this is the latest details. CNN and company, they're all trying to change up their headlines now, still blaming Israel. Israel accused. We'll bring you the updates as they come. All right. In the meantime, Donald Trump is battling just to stay in the presidential campaign and just to have the ability to speak. The special counsel, Jack Smith, he's a tool of the Biden administration trying to destroy Trump's candidacy, has been battling it out with him in court. And Judge Chutkan, right here in Washington, D.C., has been a part of an effort to silence him. She issued a gag order on Donald Trump this week. He's not allowed to defend himself in public. Julie Kelly was in the courtroom. She's the author of Declassified by Julie Kelly. It's a Substack. And she's also the author of How Democrats Use the Capitol Protest to Launch a War on Terror Against the Political Right. Julie, great to have you back with us.
Thanks for having me on. It. Still at the courthouse. I came back today to cover a couple of other January 6 trials. So it's here.
Oh, no. It's a little hard to hear you, unfortunately, so we might have to reconnect. But Julie, what was it like in the court?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you okay right now. Let's see how it goes. What was it like in the courthouse yesterday? How did Judge Chutkan treat the defendant, Donald Trump?
To have the federal government.
All right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to reconnect with Julie. Sometimes we have these problems. We're going to reconnect with Julie. We'll give her a call back and see if we can make this work. But as you no doubt know by now, Judge Chutkan is an Obama appointee who yesterday imposed a gag order of sorts on Donald Trump, said he's not allowed to talk about or intimidate the witnesses in the case, whatever that means. And she seemed to rely entirely on very convoluted reasoning that Jack Smith came up with in order to justify silencing a presidential candidate, nevertheless an American citizen, during an important presidential campaign as he heads into 2024. And Donald Trump is not just the top political opponent to Joe Biden. He is. He's also the front runner of the presidential race. Most of the available polling right now shows that Trump is ahead. Trump is ahead of Joe Biden. And critically, where it matters, in some of these swing states, you're beginning to see surveys showing over and over and over again that Trump has a meaningful lead over Biden there, which means if you lead in the swing states, you become the next president of the United States. And the left is throwing everything at this guy to try and stop him, including now a gag order. Let's turn back to Julie Kelly. We've reconnected now. Julie, hello.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Much better. Tell me about the courtroom yesterday.
So it was just a surreal experience, Vince, watching prosecutors from Jack Smith's office go back and forth with Judge Chutkan, Obama appointee, about what Donald Trump, a former president and the presumptive GOP presidential candidate, what he can say on social media or what he can say on the campaign stop This took over 2 hours back and forth, and also, of course, debating with John Lauro, who is Trump's defense attorney. Tanya Chutkan, very combative with him, accusing Donald Trump of using his platform to make derogatory, inflammatory, and threatening comments towards the prosecutors and even towards potential witnesses. So that was a fascinating debate, actually an historical debate. And then today she filed her paper order outlining kind of the scope of what the gag order will involve.
It's just, it's jaw-dropping to me, and it's jaw-dropping to a lot of lawyers who actually respect the First Amendment and the Constitution, who are seeing all this going, this is totally without precedent. You have the leading candidate for president in the United States who's being silenced by a federal judge who was appointed by the opposing political party. It kind of seems third world, no?
Well, it really does, and it actually is third world. I mean, this is Banana Republic-style environment. I'm still here at the D.C. courthouse. I was at 2 other January 6 hearings today. It's just shocking, nonstop shocking to watch these judges and prosecutors and what they're doing to individuals, and of course now to Donald Trump. And here, the tricky part for Trump, of course, is that all of this goes back to the interpretation of Judge Tanya Chutkan, who is a far-left radical judge with a history of imposing excessive sentences against January 6 defendants. She has made comments, derogatory comments herself, about Donald Trump in a few of these cases, as I've reported. But it's all based on her interpretation. For example, she blasted Trump in court yesterday for calling Mark Milley, suggesting that he committed treason when he went behind Trump's back as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and talked to his Chinese counterpart, telling him he would warn him if Donald Trump planned anything in the waning weeks of his presidency. Instead of Tanya Chutkan expressing outrage at that, she was angry that Donald Trump posted on Truth Social, condemning that and saying it was treasonous and at one point would be punishable by death. She said that Donald Trump in that post suggested that Mark Milley should be executed. So this is the kind of thought process that she goes through, and that is what will base her decision on whether or not he violates her gag order. This is a total contempt trap for Donald Trump and now his associates and his lawyers.
So what happens if Donald Trump says, I don't care what you say, I'm going to defend myself and I'm going to speak up when I think I'm being wronged and I don't think you should rig the election? What if he says all that? What does she do?
Well, what will happen is she could find him in contempt of court. She would have to explain, but she has no oversight except the appellate court, and they're basically a rubber stamp for these judges as well. So she will just say that he's in violation of the gag order in contempt. And they were discussing yesterday what potential consequences he would face if he did violate the gag order. And this includes fines. This includes moving up the trial date, which they can't do because they're not prepared. But it also could involve things like home detention, a curfew, and possibly incarceration if she finds that he is repeatedly violating the gag order. So this is just the start of what's going to happen with this order. And I imagine that they will be in court quite a bit. Trump's attorneys fighting off accusations by Jack Smith and Tanya Chutkan that he's violated this very broad gag order. It's not limited,
yes,
despite how the media has portrayed it. It's extremely broad, vague, and as I said, subject to her interpretation.
It's an obvious trampling of his constitutional rights and certainly those who would seek to support him in the presidential election. So what is the American Civil Liberties Union doing today to defend Donald Trump?
I hear crickets from the ACLU, as I have for nearly 3 years, related to this abusive, selective prosecution of people involved in January 6th. So they haven't said anything. But Vince, you raised such a good point. This is not just impacting Donald Trump and his lawyers and campaign associates. It impacts the American electorate. We have a right to hear a full vetting of all of the candidates and their views about government and their views about a DOJ that most Americans don't trust, and the weaponization of federal agencies against part of the country. So she is also impacting the election and denying our rights to hear every candidate through the 2024 election.
I mean, if one of the rationales for your candidacy is that you're running to root out tyranny and corruption, you have to be able to say that.
Right. So she says for now that it's okay for Donald Trump. Isn't this nice of her? It's okay for him to criticize Joe Biden. It's okay to criticize the Department of Justice. But he cannot say anything about special counsel Jack Smith, who has not one but two criminal cases against Donald Trump. Of course, he's got the classified documents case in Southern Florida as well. So Jack Smith can file and say whatever he wants in court. Of course, he gave two press briefings after these indictments were handed down.
Yeah.
He could say, his prosecutors can say whatever they want, and Donald Trump, his lawyers, can only respond in court filings, not publicly.
But presumably she's doing this because I think you mentioned it before that you know, if he says stuff about his political opponents, the people who are seeking to destroy him, that will lead to threats upon their life or something. Is there any evidence that Donald Trump's words have caused someone to be, you know, crippled or killed by in any way?
No. And what she did in her gag order today was basically lift Jack Smith's examples from his proposed gag orders. These are examples lifted from the January 6th Select Committee, by the way. Nothing that Jack Smith has investigated independently. These are just extemporaneous claims made by certain people tied to the 2020 election that Donald Trump's tweets or Donald Trump's comments and interviews led to them getting threats. None of this is a sworn affidavit. None of this it has been under oath. This is all just basically hearsay. So Jack Smith lifts it from the J6 report, and she lifts it from Jack Smith's proposed gag order. And that's what she said today is, here's the examples of the defendant using inflammatory, threatening language and people getting threats based off of it. That's it. There's no evidence that anything Donald Trump has said since the indictment was handed down in August,
yes,
or since Jack Smith was appointed last November, that any of this has resulted in serious threats against anyone.
One of the other, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought one of the other rationales for imposing a gag on him is to keep the jury pool uncorrupted or something. Like, yeah, if we keep him from attacking the people associated with this case, then the jury pool will be able to be fair. That's a bizarre rationale, considering that literally the entire press is dedicated to the destruction of Donald Trump's life and existence. It kind of seems like it might bias a jury pool, Julie Kelly.
Right. I mean, that's the funniest accusation of all, or funniest claim, is that somehow Donald Trump is going to threaten the D.C. jury pool or influence them or intimidate them. I mean, this is an absolute joke. DOJ has a near perfect conviction record against Trump supporters related to January 6 prosecutions in Washington, D.C. They are getting guilty convictions in record time on almost every count. So the idea that somehow he's going to influence them, he's going to intimidate them, they're going to be afraid of Donald Trump. Keep in mind, they've also asked for extremely stringent rules related to jury selection and the identification of jurors. So that's going to be the next big battle. The contrast of how this is being handled in all the other January 6 cases, think about this, Vince. There was no concern about influencing the jury pool when the January 6 Select Committee was holding publicized, televised national hearings, when they were mentioning defendants who were on trial at that time, mentioning them by name. These same judges came back and said, oh, no, you can get a fair jury. We'll be very careful with the selection process. It doesn't matter that everyone from Joe Biden to Merrick Garland and Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney are out there calling these people terrorists as we're trying to select a jury for these individuals. They didn't care about any of that then. Now, all of a sudden, they're worried about it. Yeah. The double standard just never ends.
Never ends, and neither does your excellent reporting. Julie Kelly, thank you very much. You can find her on her excellent Substack, Declassified by Julie Kelly. Julie, great to talk to you today, as always. Yeah, the left is going after Trump again, trying to rob him of his ability to speak. We're not rigging the election. It's amazing. It really is amazing. Here's Trump yesterday saying, yeah, they put a gag order on me.
Today, a judge put on a gag order. I'll be the only politician in history that runs with a gag order where I'm not allowed to criticize people. Can you imagine this? Do you believe this? I'm not allowed to criticize people, so we'll see. We'll appeal it.
We'll appeal it, he said. David Schoen, a former Trump impeachment lawyer, was on Laura Ingram's Fox program last night, and he said, yeah, this is thuggish what they're doing to him.
I think it's a frontal attack on the First, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments. I think that part of her justification, she said, well, he's a criminal defendant. Criminal defendants can't say what they want. Who says so? He's a citizen of the United States. Criminal defendant is entitled to the presumption of innocence under In re Winship. That means he's not guilty of anything. He's entitled to challenge the process and the substance publicly. And quite frankly, the Supreme Court said in Gentile versus State Bar of Nevada, the process doesn't begin inside the courtroom. And a defendant is entitled to present his public image as he wishes. I believe he's perfectly entitled to say Jack Smith is a thug.
Yeah, you know, the downside to saying something intemperate or out of control about a court case that you're actively a defendant in is it may come back to haunt you in court, right? That's why usually lawyers are saying, hey, don't talk about this in public. We don't want to hurt our case. Let's come up with a strategy. Donald Trump's a totally different client, obviously, than the average person, for sure. I haven't seen any evidence that people have success in controlling the words that come out of his mouth. But he's entitled to say them. Now, could that lead to consequences in the courtroom? Well, that's on him if that's the case. But, again, he's entitled to his free speech. He's entitled to a presidential campaign. And the judge here, an Obama appointee, the media loves pointing out when they're Trump appointees, don't they? Well, let me point out, she is an Obama appointee. A hair-on-fire, left-wing lunatic is now governing whether the leading candidate for president is allowed to speak. And she's meddling in the election. Way to go, Judge. Way to go. All right, coming up, we're going to be joined by Itamar Marcus. He is with Palestinian Media Watch. He founded the organization, and he's got some important information for us about how the Palestinian Authority has been helping the terrorists attack Jews in Israel. Good afternoon to you. 4:35 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, Congressman Pat Fallon will be joining us at 5 o'clock from Texas. He's a member of the House Oversight Committee. We've got a lot to talk about, including the ongoing investigation into Joe Biden's theft of classified information while he was vice president of the United States and what he may have shared with Hunter. It's interesting stuff there, disturbing stuff there, and also the latest on the speaker race ongoing. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. I want to bring you the latest update on what's happening with CNN's George Orwell-style changes that they're making over the last hour. Remember, it was just at the beginning of the program I read a headline to you. Israel hits hospital and school in Gaza as blockade cripples healthcare system. And then they changed the headline after it became more and more apparent that it looks like Hamas struck its own hospital, perhaps by accident. The headline was changed to Israel accused of blasting hospital. And now the new headline, as of just moments ago, hundreds likely dead in Gaza hospital blast. So now it's become a passive voice. Hamas is not blamed. Israel was blamed several times as this headline was changed over and over and over again. Meanwhile, what is happening in the region? What do we know? And what is fueling the terror attacks on Israel? That is something that our next guest has been digging into for some time. He is Itamar Marcus, the founder and director of Palestinian Media Watch, and joins us live from Jerusalem today. Itamar, good to have you with us.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me.
Of course. First and foremost, give us a sense of what things are like in Israel right now for you.
Everybody is shocked and horrified by what happened. We couldn't imagine that something like this could happen. The descriptions of the news stories, keep interviewing people who survived, and you have sometimes one person surviving in a family. Children have disappeared, family members. It literally sounds like Holocaust stories all over again. And we thought this wouldn't happen in Israel. Everybody's in shock.
I imagine so. How different? I mean, obviously, this is such a huge and immense terror attack on Israel. I wonder what it's like. I've never been to Israel. How constant is a fear of this type of attack looming in the minds of Israelis, or is this something that was completely unexpected?
completely, totally unexpected. Even when we have periods of terror, people don't go through their day thinking about possible terror attacks. They go through the day thinking about who's going to win the next basketball game.
Yeah.
What am I going to do? What am I going to do in work? How's my job going? How's my family? People go through lives normally, and terrorism, even though it happens, is sort of on the back burner. That's why this was something that was so completely. I mean, no country. I mean, it was like 9/11. Who in America could have expected 9/11?
Yeah.
When we're talking about a country with 9 million people losing 1,300 or 1,400 people in a matter of 24 hours or 48 hours. I mean, think of 9/11, with its 3,000 or almost 3,000 people killed in a country with 300 million people. You realize the scope of what this was to Israel. Given that, I have to say, the army immediately called up the draft. We had close to 300,000 people who went immediately for the draft. In fact, there were so many people who weren't even drafted who went. There's an incredible spirit. The terror attack as much horrified everybody. It also galvanized the spirit of this country. No one is going to do this and get away with it. And that's why even people who I would say were on the left and always making excuses for the Palestinians over the years, no one's doing that anymore. Everyone wants us to go in there and get every single Hamas member, get every single leader, and we don't want to bring them back to jail either.
Let me talk about what is fueling all of this terror. You have an important report this week on the fact that the Palestinian Authority is spending millions of dollars now to reward the families of the terrorists who inflicted all of that chaos upon Israel. Tell us what you know.
The Palestinian Authority has a law in place since 2004 that every terrorist who gets arrested and goes to jail starts receiving a salary. It starts at about $350 or so a month, and eventually can get up to about $4,000 a month, which is four times the average Palestinian salary. So this is an enormous amount of money. It comes to about $300 or so million a year that the Palestinian Authority pays in salaries to terrorists and to families of what they call the martyrs. Now, 1,500 Hamas terrorists came into Israel, raped, butchered, burned people alive, slaughtered whole families, literally slaughtered whole families. Every one of those terrorists who was killed, their family is going to be getting for the first month, they're going to be getting 7,400 shekel, which is about, let's say, $2,000 from the Palestinian Authority. And then the family is going to get a monthly stipend for the rest of their life of about $350, just because their family member was a terrorist who went into Israel and raped and murdered. This is PA law.
Yeah, and this is a bounty on Israeli heads that the Palestinian Authority is paying. I'm seeing headlines right now that Palestinian Authority leader Mahmoud Abbas has canceled an apparent scheduled meeting this week with President Biden in the wake of what we now believe to be a Gaza accidental Hamas attack on a hospital in Gaza that killed, they say, the Wall Street Journal reports, more than 500 people. What do Israelis think about the idea that, one, you have the U.S. president coming in, flying into Israel, obviously to show support for Israel, but then immediately after that, going to meet with the Palestinian Authority president?
Well, I'll tell you my take on this. I'm quite concerned about the United States policies toward the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority has been the supporter of terror. We just talked about the fact that they're going to reward these terrorists. They've educated the children to be terrorists over all the years that my organization, Palestinian Media Watch, has been following this. We've done reports on their school books for the last 20 years, and they are constantly teaching hatred, they're teaching terror. There are expressions in some of the reports that we've just come out with. For example, I could read to you, the liberation of Palestine will only be achieved through armed struggle. This is a Fatah magazine for children aged 5 to 15. Palestine liberated through armed struggle. Read history well, there's no Israel. The Zionist invaders will go in the garbage can of history. This is the education that created Hamas, but it came from the Palestinian Authority. Why am I concerned? Biden is going to the PA because he wants the Palestinian Authority to step in after Israel destroys Hamas. Well, it's the Palestinian Authority that created Hamas with all this hatred, hate education. We need another alternative. We can't have Hamas, but we can't have the Palestinian Authority. And President should not be going to meet with the head of an organization that rewards terror. He shouldn't have even scheduled to meet with the Palestinian Authority officials.
Yeah, it is amazing that that's happening, especially in light of what you're talking about here. The Palestinian Authority is paying bounties on the deaths of Israelis, of Jews. This is actually happening. And your organization is Palestinian Media Watch. I imagine you've been especially busy in the last week. How is Palestinian media representing the events that took place in Israel? Is there any acknowledgement whatsoever of the deaths and the brutalizing of women and children?
The official Palestinian Authority media, which is controlled by the government, the Palestinian Authority government, has been celebrating. They have had interviews praising, talking about this is a day of glory, this is a heroic event. The Palestinian Authority across the board is supporting this, and they have to, because for years they're telling their people this is what they want. So they succeeded at a scale that was unimaginable. But they can't all of a sudden condemn it, because the people won't understand why they're condemning it. This is what you've been asking for all of these years. So, as I say, the Palestinian Authority has never been a peace partner. The United States, the European Union, all of those countries that have forced the Palestinian Authority on Israel are, in a certain respect, almost responsible for what's happened here, because they have been funding the education of the PA and legitimizing the PA, even though they were a terror-supporting entity, and that's really what led to this.
Yeah, it's awful, and it's remarkable to me. I constantly talk about this. We're talking to Itamar Marcus. He's the founder and director of Palestinian Media Watch. It's remarkable to me to see the U.S. government, in this case the Biden administration, for as long as they've been doing it, funding Israel, offering support to Israel, and then simultaneously offering support, giving money to the Palestinian Authority, giving money to Gaza and Hamas, and it seems like funding both sides of these critical conflicts, just creating hell for the people that are caught in them.
Well, that's what the United States is trying to do. They're trying to be a bridge by giving money, literally hundreds of millions of dollars this year to the Palestinians through UNRWA and from other projects that they call humanitarian projects, literally many, many hundreds of millions.
Right.
And by also being ally of Israel, they're hoping that they can bridge, make some kind of a bridge. But the problem is they listen to what the Palestinians say when they have a private meeting with them, and they talk peace. They say they want to live as neighbors, and they don't read what they're telling their children. They don't listen to what they're telling their own people on TV. And if America really wanted to know, if the Biden administration or any American official wanted to know what the Palestinians really want and where their end game is, don't listen to them when they talk to you. Read what they tell their own people. That's my message to all the leaders around the world.
Yeah, it's a good idea. And look at Hamas's charter and what their goals for Israel are. They're not really shy about that fact at all. Itamar Marcus, again, founder and director of Palestinian Media Watch. Sir, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you for spending some with us and sharing this important reporting. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
That's Itamar Marcus. In this jarring realization that, you've got the Palestinian Authority who's paying money to the families of the terrorists who butchered all of these Israelis. And then you're wondering, all right, how did this happen? Well, all of the incentives are there, whether it's the Islamist radicalism or just the monetary incentives. Oh, your family's life is going to be improved if you slaughter Israelis. And now with the additional discovery today that Hamas has now killed potentially hundreds of civilians in Gaza inside of a hospital, hundreds of them. Well, tack that onto the body count. What does that put them up near? 1,800, 2,000 people just in the last week and a half killed by Hamas. It is so wild what's happening. And so Joe Biden off to Israel, meeting with Israeli leadership, and then subsequently he was supposed to meet with Mahmoud Hamas, who's the head of the Palestinian Authority. That meeting has been canceled. That's the report here in the last hour, following the apparent destruction of a hospital in Gaza by, it looks like, according to the IDF, Hamas. They misfired a missile, striking one of their own hospitals. It's 4:48 now. Meanwhile, to Israel's north, Iran-funded Hezbollah, Iran everywhere, has announced a day of unprecedented anger against Israel for tomorrow. They're going to have a day of unprecedented anger. Where do they come up with these adjectives? A day of unquenchable rage against Israel. So we're sending the President of the United States in there tomorrow. Does that seem like a good idea? For what purpose? Who knows? But Hezbollah now saying that they're encouraging everyone to demonstrate their unprecedented anger. How much worse could it get after that horrific attack on Israel last week? And there's new reporting out of Reuters from 18 minutes ago that is just completely corrupt. The headline is Attack on Gaza Hospital Unprecedented in Scale, World Health Organization says. The attack on the Al-Arabi Hospital in the north of the Gaza Strip that killed hundreds was, quote, unprecedented in scale, the World Health Organization said Tuesday, condemning the blast. The strike was the bloodiest single incident in Gaza since Israel launched a bombing campaign against the densely populated Gaza Strip in retaliation for a deadly cross-border Hamas assault on Israeli communities on October 7th. Did you hear that? A deadly cross-border Hamas assault on Israel. No, not a single sentence is spent on the nature of the so-called assault by Hamas. They're filleting Israelis in the streets and murdering them in cold blood. Okay? Not a single sentence in this Reuters piece is on that. And remember, this piece just came out within the last 20 minutes, and that is with the benefit of the IDF having released a statement in the last hour saying this is not an Israeli missile that struck this hospital. This was Hamas. Israel's being generous here. They said it appears that they accidentally struck their own hospital and killing hundreds. And here you have Reuters blaming Israel again in a piece that just came out. Now, I have to say, I'm getting a ton of notifications from news outlets right now who are all trying to retcon their old coverage from an hour ago. The New York Times just out with a push alert. Israel said a misfired Palestinian rocket caused the explosion. The Wall Street Journal now correcting its prior reporting where they claimed that Israel was responsible. Israeli officials said the explosion at the hospital in Gaza was caused by a Palestinian rocket. So now everyone's rushing to switch all of this up. But, you know, I did see that there are conservatives who are very accustomed to these types of lies being expressed by the media and then what we call stealth edited, which is basically they change the entire nature of the piece entirely. This used to be called a correction. You would prominently feature that you made a correction because you had previously published an error. That is not what is happening these days. Corporate media, by and large, unless there's some sort of immense pressure campaign to get them to admit their errors and then to say what they got wrong and tell us what the correct version is, they don't issue corrections. They just stealth edit. They just change the copy entirely. And they, what's the problem? The piece just says what we know. What's the problem? Well, you lied in the first place. And now you have, talk about whipping people into a frenzy. You're saying Israel killed 500 civilians in a hospital. People connected to oxygen machines and things were killed by Israelis. And you're only further inflaming the entire crisis without knowing anything, without knowing a thing. And then even after you do know some information, Reuters here attacking Israel, saying it's their fault. Coming up, we're going to be joined by Congressman Pat Fallon. He's just minutes away. We'll talk about what's happening in the United States of America. 2/3 of the public think that Joe Biden is hopelessly corrupt. Congressman Pat Fallon is among the people digging in to that very question.